we're going in the right direction. We're trending up. And so these next 2 years will be very telling, especially now that we have divided government with Congress, with the House being run by Republicans, even with the slim margin, but still being run by the Republican Party.
This week marks the 2-year anniversary of the Biden-Harris administration, and also the first half of the first term for this administration. How do you think Black Americans should grade the Biden-Harris administration so far?
And when it comes to Black America specifically, I would think, a solid B- is where I think the Biden administration is right now. I mean, Jaron, we can't forget that a lot of Black Americans voted for Joe Biden as strategic voters. We know African Americans are the most strategic voters when they go to the ballot box because they have to factor in their own personal preferences, but also keeping in the shadow of they know the capacity of the white voter and what they will and will not go for. And so sometimes Black Americans will sacrifice their own first choice so that they can at least get something as opposed to nothing. And I would argue that Donald Trump would be an example of getting nothing. And so even if Black Americans liked one of the other 21 candidates who were on that stage at one point in time in the Democratic primary, they knew that obviously Joe Biden's relationship with James Clyburn and the success in South Carolina, the momentum he got there was actually going to move him forward. And then when he chose Kamala Harris as his running mate, obviously for many Black Americans, that signaled another groundbreaking way that Joe Biden and the Democratic Party would welcome in Black Americans to some of the most elite levels of governance. So a B- because in some ways, Kamala Harris was missing for a lot of Black people for a very long time, and they were wondering what she was doing, what she was being utilized to do. We're still not there with resolving the student debt crisis. Inflation affects Black Americans in very different ways, as does unemployment, and we're definitely on the upswing. But sometimes, all tides don't lift all boats. We still have some questions about criminal justice. There's still, a lot of questions Black Americans have about the copious amounts of money, billions upon billions of dollars that we've been able to find for Ukraine, but not necessarily for Black communities when it comes from everything from transportation to housing to the environment to education and schools to colleges. But I will say part of what gives the Biden administration a boost is their ability to not only have descriptive representation of African Americans in very key positions, but substantive representation. They've gotten very qualified Black people, even within the constraints of Congress, with such a limited unified government that Joe Biden was working with for such a short period of time, but not just cabinets and upper echelon positions, but even Joe Biden's acknowledgement of the importance and the significance of HBCUs and the Divine Nine and the contributions that they continue to make in all sectors, policy sectors of the country, and really trying to support those institutions in ways that we haven't seen before, I think is definitely we're going in the right direction. We're trending up. And so these next 2 years will be very telling, especially now that we have divided government with Congress, with the House being run by Republicans, even with the slim margin, but still being run by the Republican Party.
I think he earns a big A. If you were to use the letter grades that I used, I was subjected to when I was in school, though I can't remember getting many A's. I think that Joe Biden deserves that kind of a grade. Just look at where we were when he took office 2 years ago. This country was engulfed in this worst healthcare crisis in over 100 years. COVID-19 running rampant. People were dying in hospitals. Schools were closed. Businesses shuttered. And this president undertook within the first 2 months the Rescue Act. The American Rescue Plan opened up schools, reopened businesses, and got support to mom and pop operations as well as big corporations to get people back on their feet and put cash in people's pockets. Took children. Over half of the children living in poverty were almost immediately taken out of poverty. And if you look at that rescue plan, you're going to find that cities and counties and states are still benefiting dramatically from the American Rescue Plan. We've heard a lot of talk about the bills that followed very successfully. We got the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill to start rebuilding roads and bridges, putting people back to work. We passed the so-called CHIPS and Science bill. That bill brought jobs back to this country. As of last week, we saw people on Medicare having their price of insulin drop to a cap at $35 per month. These are things that people were crying out for. And people were saying in the first year of this administration that he was not going to get anything done. Well, look back over the last 2 years, and let me tell you what you're going to find. You are going to find that this administration passed more progressive legislation than any administration since Lyndon Baines Johnson's Great Society back in 1965. So he deserves an A, and he deserves re-election.